In regards to Gurdjieff sacrificing stuff, there are a couple of things about Gurdjieff, but before we talk about that, let me just tell you one tiny story from my own life, which was, when you're young, as I was very young once, you want to look like the dervishes of the past. And so I remember my friends always telling me, Amir, what is wrong with you? I would say. And I remember we were sitting, it was me, Hussein, Mehrdad, and Manucher, who ended his life because he fell in love and that didn't work out. And we heard of this just a few years ago that he committed suicide. But I remember we were sitting having some food and he looks at me and says, Amir, why do you look like this? You didn't look like this always. When we went to school, you looked really good and you're a nice looking guy. You have a beard now, you don't cut your hair, you wear baggy clothes. What's wrong with you? And what he didn't really understand is I'm reading these books and I'm interacting with this man who has exposed me to these ideas. And these are like traditional, ancient ideas. And you want to live out these ideas. And the way you live out these ideas as a young kid, you want to look like a hippie, a Persian hippie that looks like a dervish, So you grow your beard long and you wear this long black jacket every single day, wherever you go. And everything about your life just begins to change. You don't talk as much, you don't laugh as much, you don't tell jokes as much, you don't go out as much, you don't interact with anyone as much. And so your friends know this. Now, I had gone to Hussein's meeting that night, just the way I looked with the beard and long hair and all that. Hussein was very, very, very allergic to those things. He didn't like mimicry. He didn't enjoy anyone pretending to be something that they were not. He wanted people to live a very normal life, be invisible in the sense that they need to look like all the other people on the outside, because you don't want attention, especially when you're a novice. You get attention, you will like the attention, and then you will lose the intentions of why you did this in the first place. I remember that night he looks at me and says, Amir, listen, you need to shave. I said, really? I like my beard. And I think way back then when he told me that, I felt as if he was telling me to shave because he couldn't grow his beard as nice as I could. Mine was like straight, it would just kind of lay on my face, and his was bushy, very messy looking. But regardless, of what I thought or what I felt as to what he was telling me, I said, okay, I'll shave. But you need to understand, it wasn't just like hair on my face. This hair on my face was an expression of my desire to be a dervish, to be a Sufi, to live a certain lifestyle, to look a certain way. So there were all these things that Hussein was telling me to shave off. So that night, because I was so tired, I went to Mehrdad's house and I slept there. And from Mehrdad's house, I go to the car wash. Hussein comes to the car wash in the morning. And I think he came there to make sure that I did as he asked. And he looks at me and says, you still look the same. I tried to explain to him the reason why I couldn't shave was because I, stayed at Mehrdad's house and I didn't have access to, razor and all that. And he shook his head very, very disappointedly. And as always, he would tell me, Amir, you will never amount to anything. That was like his favorite line. And I would say, yes, I know. I will never amount to anything. And, you will never amount to anything by the time you fall in love with your teacher and by the time he makes you feel like crap, it doesn't really mean anything anymore because you don't amount to anything. Everything about your life has become a mess, it's no longer manageable. You wake up in a bad mood, you live out your day in a bad mood, and you go to sleep in a bad mood. And you're just not digestible to yourself or anyone else. And it's interesting because now when I have students who want to dress a certain way and speak a certain way and look a certain way, I always tell them, listen, why don't you wear a suit and a tie? What's wrong with you? Why do you have to look this way? So this idea of sacrifice, we become attached to things, all sorts of things. There can be attachments to things on the outside, things on the inside. Sigmund Freud had argued that the only way change is possible, I guess many different ways, but one of the ways that change is possible is when you fall in love with your therapist. The problem in falling in love with your therapist is that the task of a therapist is to bring to the surface all the traumas that you have pushed down. And every time the trauma comes up, you hate the trauma and you hate the person who has forced you in some shape or form to bring the trauma to the surface, where you see them and then you feel and then you become angry and you can't control anything. And you have to do this over and over and over again until you look at your therapist and say, thank you. Because for a long time every time it comes up, you're going to hate this person. The point, I suppose, is you read these books and you become attached to certain ideas. These ideas have emotions behind them, fantasies behind them. You know, it's kind of like the first couple of pages of Daughter of Fire, where she says, I had all these ideas about yoga, I had all these ideas about meditation, what a teacher should look like, how a teacher should behave. And I came to realize that I was wrong. And that 1,000 pages of Daughter of Fire is all about that you cry because your expectations are not being met, and they're not being met because you expected one thing, but the teacher knows better, so he does the exact opposite, until you come to a place of acceptance. There is but something you should know about Gurdjieff that I don't think you will find very many people out there like Gurdjieff. You know, Gurdjieff understands something that most teachers, myself included, don't really understand, which is change is not possible by talking. Change is not possible by listening. Theory, like the Spirit of God, needs to come down here, and it needs to take flesh, the form of flesh and bones. It needs to walk, and it needs to upset you. You know, it needs to break you. It needs to walk into your physical life and have physical qualities. It needs to push you around. One of the beautiful things about Gurdjieff is that he was a hands-on teacher. He knew that, what's the use of talking about anything? You want to really understand the allegory of the cave? You walk into a classroom and sit in a classroom where there is Plato or Socrates talking about the allegory itself. And they're articulate, and they're eloquent, and they are intense, and they're passionate. And little by little you realize that your life really is in fact the allegory of the cave. You embody the allegory. And it's not like something you sit and just write a crappy 2-page essay on, where you have to present to an audience of your peers. That's just a stupid way of doing philosophy. And he was such a gift. Now here's the problem with hands-on teachers. They're always going to be misunderstood, because all of us have in our heads this idea that teachers are always supposed to turn the other cheek when they get slapped. They always should exercise compassion and forgiveness. They should kind of be softly spoken. Their passion should be very, very controlled and tamed. They should never use profanities. And Gurdjieff kind of defies all that stuff. He will not allow you to, or encourage you to continue with those ridiculous narratives as to how a teacher should be. If you want to change, if you want to transform, if you want your life to be morphed into a butterfly, well, you need to be beaten up. You need to be upset. You need to be made angry. You're going to be asked to do things that you say, why do I need to do this? This is ridiculous. This doesn't make any sense. And yet you have to do it. Now, is it true that this approach could find themselves or itself in the hands of charlatans? Yes. Is it true that some people could manipulate this particular power if they have any? Yeah. Is it also true that it may fall in the hands of someone who is perhaps not a charlatan? Yeah. Can you know who is and who isn't a charlatan? No. It's just a matter of luck. You really must have experienced something profound. And I'm not talking about these hippie spiritual stuff that people talk about. Look, if someone was to come to me and say, Amir, so can you tell me about having children? I say, well, no, it's a guy or a gal asking a question. I should kind of be nice about it. Gurdjieff, on the other hand, looks at this person and says, listen, I'm going to tell you some things. They're going to be like 10% positive, 90% negative. Do you want to hear it? I think Gurdjieff made himself available only to those who had the capacity to endure a lot of pain. That you're willing to put your life in his hand. You know, there is this, I don't know what book it comes from. I think it's Our Lives with Mr. Gurdjieff, Olga and Thomas de Hartmann, the guy who did the music for Gurdjieff. It's like raining and Gurdjieff is driving and he's going really, really fast. And he's going very fast for one simple reason. Olga is scared of being in the car at night, especially when it's raining and the roads are slippery. And so she looks at Gurdjieff, they're sitting in the back, and says, Gurdjieff, can you drive a little slower? You know, it's raining, it's dark, it's dangerous. And Gurdjieff says, sure. And so he presses on the gas pedal. The poor woman says, I asked you if you could kindly slow down, you know. The car is going a little too fast. And there comes a point she screams at Gurdjieff and she demands that he stops the car, pulls over to let her out. And Thomas, you know, his account is, well, you know, if my wife gets out, I can't just stay in the car, I have to get out as well. So he gets out as well. And they're stranded in the middle of nowhere and Gurdjieff just leaves. Turns around, comes back after 5 minutes. They get back in the car and Olga says in their book that Gurdjieff didn't have an ounce of anger in him, despite the fact that I said all these nasty things to him. He doesn't care if you stay in his school or not. He'll give you an experience. And I suppose the best he can hope for is that you will have the capacity to endure the experience. First of all, the experience itself, and then go home and reflect on the experience and hopefully process the experience. And you don't find teachers like this. They're like one of these people, I suppose, in every generation. And you can make the sacrifices on your own in the sense that I can look myself in the mirror and say, I want to shave my beard. I'm far too attached. I have too many blind spots. I needed someone like Hussein, who has kind of gone through all the stuff before me, and he knows the pitfalls a little bit. He says, I know why you have this beard on your face, and I know why you're wearing these long baggy jackets. I know why you're quiet and why your body language is the way it is. You're trying to like mimic things that don't belong to you right now. So I need you to change your ways. If I didn't love Hussein the way I did, and way back then I didn't have the language, I wouldn't say love. Now I think I can sit back and say, if I didn't love him, I would have never shaved my beard. So you can't make sacrifices if you don't love someone. There are going to be these moments where some things are going to be asked, but you're at a certain state, certain moods where you love, but you also doubt. So you're stuck between the yes and the no, and the maybe, I suppose. And there isn't much you can do about those things. And it's normal to have them. There's nothing wrong with that. Hussein had a funny way of requesting his desires to be met. He would call and say, well, come over. I said, well, my family has guests. And you say, I tell you to come over. And you say, okay, I'll be there in 5 minutes. Well, you couldn't say no, not when he says it like that, And most often you don't really know why you're doing it, why you should do it in the first place. And I think without really knowing at that time, you're just taking a leap of faith. Like day after day after day after day, they keep asking you to do A, B, C, D, and you keep doing them. And you don't really know if it's going to get you anywhere, and you don't even really think like that. You just say, you know what, I like this guy, I'm just going to do what he asks. And there is such a, it really does make you feel good. Last weekend I went to my parents' house in Roseville, and my mom said, Amir, can you not go to the car wash? This was like before I drove there. I said, okay, and I'm coming there for what then? Because I just saw you guys. He said, well, I need you to put some trims around the windows. I said, so you want me to like bring all these tools so I can like fix your house? Yeah, okay. So I put all the stuff. And I did it for one reason. I was such a lousy kid. If I was a father to someone like me, and Yusuf is just like me, I would have probably like killed him. And whenever Yusuf and I clash, it always reminds me of me and my parents, how they sent me to India and to America and did all sorts of things to make sure I don't become a bum. So, I put all the stuff and I go there despite being exhausted. And I spend like 6 hours doing the trims. And every time I call, they say, oh, my father especially says, your mom really is liking what you did to the windows. When you're making the sacrifices, you don't really understand. Time passes. You begin to make some reflections, some calculations. You go past, you go present, you go future. You hear the voice of your parents, your mom, your dad. And then you understand that your sacrifices actually paid off. You have made someone you cared for extremely happy. And you benefit as well. I would tell you more stories about other things, but I'll just stop there. But you should appreciate Gurdjieff. Not so much Gurdjieff on paper, but how he put himself in very dangerous situations to make sure that someone else can understand something.